This is episode 9 with Zachary Stockhill. Your challenges don't define you. However, how you choose to handle them does. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Laugh at Adversity podcast. I'm your host, Gary Savoy. Having overcome medical trauma, I've made it my mission to uncover all of the secrets to overcoming life's challenges and living a better life. Each week, I will bring you an inspiring person or message. You'll hear from some of the most inspirational people on this planet, including those who have overcome adversity firsthand. My goal is to provide you with everything you need to conquer your challenges and to turn your struggles into strengths. This interview with Zachary was my favorite to date. When I first stumbled across Zachary's website, I had no idea what retroactive jealousy was. After reading his story, I discovered that in his earlier years, Zachary struggled with getting over his girlfriend's past relationships. At some point in any serious relationship, we all have the talk. You know, the one about our partner's sexual past? And for some of us, we get into the self-destructive cycle of unnecessary questions, details, analysis, and judgment regarding our partner's past sexual history. In his early 20s, Zachary was smart enough to realize that in order to have a healthy relationship going forward, he needed to do some self-reflection and self-development to get over his jealous tendencies. Now that he's been able to be in retroactive jealousy for good, he works with people all over the world to help them do the same through both his book and courses on his website. In this episode, we talk about what retroactive jealousy really means, why unrealistic expectations can trigger jealousy, why every relationship is a gamble, the alternative to trusting someone, and why there are no limits when you experience a true deep connection with someone. We also discuss why jealousy causes us to hold back our feelings toward our partner and how we can handle our jealous thoughts, and why we can't really experience love when we are holding back. This conversation isn't just for anyone who's dealing with your partner's sexual past. We talk about much, much more than that, including jealousy and relationships as a whole. So without further ado, here's my interview with Zachary Stockhill. Hi, Zachary. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about jealousy and your background. I know that's a lot of what you work on and what your site's all about. So would you mind talking a little bit about retroactive jealousy and also your history with it?
Sure. So a lot of people find me on the internet, and they've never actually. A lot of people find me, and it's their first time encountering the term. So perhaps I'll just talk a little bit about what that term encapsulates. Retroactive jealousy, in a nutshell, basically refers to being bothered by a partner's past relationships, which is something that I think a lot of people go through, especially in the early stages of meeting someone, falling in love, entering a relationship. You know, you might be a little curious about their past and what they've experienced and what they haven't experienced, and so on. What I deal with primarily is something that's more akin to obsessive compulsive disorder, or retroactive jealousy, OCD, which basically refers to a state of being where you're kind of obsessed with your partner's past, which might sound very odd to someone listening to this who has never experienced that, but hundreds of thousands of people, by my estimation, around the world struggle with retroactive jealousy, OCD. And it can be extremely debilitating, extremely frustrating, and enormously painful for everyone involved, because on the one hand, there's you being consumed by, perhaps it's mental movies of your partner's past, consumed by incessant curiosity about their past, about what they experienced in their past with their ex-lovers and so on. And for your partner, it's absolute hell, because quite often retroactive jealousy sufferers take out their frustration on their partner. They often question them incessantly, begging for more details, because the retroactive jealousy sufferer feels that if they just get more answers to these questions, then hopefully their problem will fade away and they'll get some peace of mind. But as anyone with knowledge of OCD will tell you, that OCD doesn't work like that.
Right.
It really feeds this vicious cycle where, the more details you get, the more you want to know, and you might get temporary relief by getting answers to these questions, but it always comes back. So basically, why I'm speaking to you today is in my late teens and early 20s, I was a retroactive jealousy, OCD sufferer. The first time I fell in love, I kind of went through the classic retroactive jealousy cycle where I was, enormously infatuated with this woman, and I think I idealized her in a lot of ways. And before I knew it, I was stuck in this retroactive jealousy cycle about things that had happened before. I met her, and it's not like there was anything crazy in there whatsoever. It was just mostly me creating all these crazy stories about her past that weren't even true. So I struggled in vain with this for a long time, off and on, until I finally said, to hell with this. This is getting ridiculous. What is happening to me? Because I didn't really know anyone in my personal life who had ever dealt with anything like this. I started Googling around, and the information online was pretty mediocre or, non-existent. There was basically nothing about retroactive jealousy. And anything I could find was just filled with a lot of extremely judgmental people telling me that I was a real asshole for, for being this way. How dare you have all these double standards, blah, blah, blah. And I'm reading this and it's like, okay, I get it. Like, I don't want to feel this way. But what can you actually do to help? So I went on through this long process, this long journey toward looking at different spiritual traditions, and I read every psychology book I could find. I went to therapy. I joined a men's group. I did these really intensive meditation retreats, really trying to find answers. And finally, when I got to a place where I felt like I'd found a lot of the answers I was looking for, I wrote this book called Overcoming Retroactive Jealousy. And it, thankfully, it's resonated with a lot of people. And here I am talking to you today.
So I'd like to go back to the part about, creating some of those thoughts and some that might not even be true. Do you have any sense of why we do that and why we create, maybe false beliefs or false past things that may have not even happened?
Yeah, it's a complicated question and it's a complicated answer. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, what I've gathered is that most researchers aren't really sure about one theory of why people get OCD. So this could be, a genetic heritage, could be environmental things that cause this. But I think the common denominator in a lot of this is some underlying sense of insecurity. So you find someone, you fall in love, because it's interesting to know that retroactive jealousy basically never happens unless the person is deeply in love. If you meet someone for a casual thing, or it's someone you're not that taken with, generally speaking, retroactive jealousy doesn't come up. So I think at the core, it's a fear of loss, and it's a deep sense of insecurity on some level that we think perhaps we don't measure up to our partner's past lovers. Perhaps our partner will go back to something that he or she enjoyed before, etc. So as you can see, confronting the underlying deep insecurities there is one of the quickest ways to start getting a handle on this.
Do you think a lot of these insecurities might be related to the person's, upbringing or their past or possibly trust issues?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, I think, like any psychotherapist will tell you, this all comes back to childhood. I think a lot of it comes back to our earliest childhood experiences, looking to our parents as role models in terms of what to expect from life and love and relationships, and certainly trust issues. And it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot lately. I'm writing a new book about jealousy, and I've been thinking a lot about, what are the actual underlying beliefs that are in some way supporting or buttressing our jealousy. And a lot of it comes down to, I think, really unrealistic expectations of relationships. We look to the one with the capital O. We look to, lifelong devotion, and we look to these declarations of commitment and all these things that really are just impossible for anyone to live up to. So I think a lot of it comes down to questioning our deepest beliefs about relationships, about how possible it is to really trust someone, and trying to put together a somewhat more realistic view of the world, and being okay with taking the chance, because every relationship, one thing I like to tell clients is, like, every relationship is a gamble. Especially my male clients, they tend to look to me to think, to get a sense of, how much can I trust this woman, based on some of the things I know about her past and all the rest. And it's like, you could go down on a Sunday morning to your local church and find the most, virginal, pure, quote unquote, pure church going angel you can find. But any relationship you enter is a gamble.
Right.
And it really comes down to how much of a gamble you're willing to take. But I think the alternative is worse. I think the alternative of, not taking those chances and always living with these kind of two hands covering up your heart, I think is far worse than taking the risk.
Yeah, I feel like, some of the impacts of of being jealous, it causes, distance in the relationship. And eventually I feel like the relationship ends up crumbling because you end up suffocating the other person.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. I mean, jealousy and insecurity are pretty unattractive when it comes down to it, for sure. And it's interesting that that's a constant whether you're talking to men or women. That seems to be a pretty universal turnoff.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask that. Do you tend to have more male or female clients?
I think it's changed over the years. I think first it was probably more men finding me, but now I would estimate it's a lot closer, maybe 55% men and around 45% women. It's also interesting to note that the men are often far more troubled by the sex their partner had, where the women are far more troubled by the love that their partner had in the past, which is kind of interesting to me.
That's very interesting. I know from a male perspective, I know a lot of us probably think, we'd like to think that our female partners didn't have, sex with any other guys. But that's simply not the case.
Right, right. Yeah, unless you move to Saudi Arabia, I think that's going to be kind of tough to find in the 21st century. It's a really interesting time to be, having these discussions and working around sex and relationships and dating and stuff because, you and I grew up in the wake of the sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s, and we're in this really interesting phase where it's like I think that a lot of the promise of the 1960s and 70s in terms of, free love and have as much sex as you want and, this is the way to happiness. I think we're in the very early stages of people finally starting to question that idea. I think a lot of people are swiping left and swiping right and having a lot of really disappointing experiences and a kind of hangover feeling after several years of leading a promiscuous lifestyle. It's like people are wanting more. And I think that we're in the very early stages of people really sort of questioning whether or not that's really the lifestyle that is ideal for us. It's interesting to me.
That's actually a very interesting point. I'd like to dig into that a little more because, in the era of dating apps and like you mentioned swiping left and swiping right, it's so easy to kind of move on to the next one. And find another match, but I feel like that connection piece is missing where we used to have. I feel like we used to have it more in relationships, connections, actual connections with people. But I feel like social media and these dating apps are kind of ruining that aspect of relationships. There's no deep connection with people, and it's just so easy to move on to the next one.
It is, yeah. And especially because I think adding to the problem is like everything in pop culture, it seems to me, just about everything in pop culture is telling us that this is the way to live. This is the way to find happiness. Be with as many people as you can, live the college party lifestyle for a while. And,
right.
And, that's the key to happiness and fulfillment. And I think that even from a purely like pleasure-based viewpoint, like if your goal is to maximize sexual pleasure, I was watching the Joe Rogan podcast yesterday, and he was talking to a pair of, I believe, evolutionary biologists, and they brought up the point that it's so true. It's like even from a perspective, you're trying to maximize sexual pleasure. Having multiple partners is not necessarily the best way to do that. In fact, it's probably really not a good way to do that because you have sex with a person for the first time, you're learning about their body, they're learning about yours. It's not going to match, the 10th or the 20th time with someone really, really well, and what turns them on, and they know what turns you on. So my hope is that we're waking up to a more realistic view of sex and sexuality, and a view that is more in line with maximizing intimacy and connection. And rather than these sort of transitory encounters, not that there's anything necessarily wrong with fleeting encounters. They can be quite fun and exciting and thrilling often. But I think even from the perspective of maximizing sexual pleasure, you're often going to get a lot more out of really going deep with one person than you are going shallow with 10 people.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's a completely different. It's completely different sex, and it's more lovemaking when, it's the 10th or 20th time with the same person and you have that connection and what turns them on. And I think it really changes the dynamic of not only the sex, but also the relationship and the connection that you have with that person.
Absolutely. And if you have a special connection with someone, which, I've experienced a handful of times in my life, not very often. Perhaps you've experienced, some of those rare connections. The
Absolutely.
really interesting thing about that is that there's really no limits in terms of how deep you can go with that person. If you have sex with them 100 times, you could still be having this sort of same, perhaps shallow-ish sex where, you're kind of just penetrating each other and you're having a good time and you're both having orgasms or whatever. But the interesting thing to me is like when you want to go deeper, it's like, getting interested in things like tantra and bypassing orgasm and, really drawing things out and, really trying to be more naked, more intimate, more honest with each other about what turns you on. Like that's where the real payoff is, I think. And the really exciting thing for people who want to maintain a monogamous relationship over 20, 30, 40 years is that I really think there's no limits in terms of how deep you can go, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, as long as you put the effort in and you guys both have the connection, you can keep, unpeeling layers of that relationship and keep building on that connection.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would totally agree. Do you mind if I ask you a question, Gary?
Yeah, sure.
So, and please tell me if this is too personal, but I'm always interested to talk to people, like, have you struggled with any jealousy in your life or relationship? Like, and if so, how have you sort of dealt with that?
Yeah, I think, so me personally, it's funny that you mentioned the childhood. I had parents that were divorced and there was some issues, some trust issues there. So I've definitely carried on, jealousy into other relationships and even in my current relationship right now. Um, but I think as far as dealing with it, I think it's more of kind of stepping back and trying to be present. And
Mm.
also realizing that, like creating those false beliefs, and you have to kind of step back and be like, well, I trust this person and they haven't done anything, to me to not trust them. And it's kind of like reversing those beliefs that you're creating, and kind of filling your mind with more positive, affirmations.
Yeah, that's great. That's bang on with a lot of what I like to write about. And the other thing too, I think to keep in mind is like, okay, well, what's the alternative to trusting this person? Let's really go deep into that idea. Like, what is the alternative? So the alternative is checking their phone all the time every time they leave the room. The alternative is hiring a private detective. The alternative is not having great sex with them because you're holding back and you're worried about getting hurt and like, can I really trust this person? Right? So
Yeah.
I think anyone listening that's like dealing with jealousy, it's like even just think about that on like a purely selfish level. Like, okay, well, if I don't trust this person, if I'm not ready to let go of it and take the chance, what is the alternative? It doesn't sound like much fun to me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you because the alternative, you're going to hold back, your own feelings, and that's going to impact the relationship. And then as the jealousy continues to spiral, and going back to the OCD, it comes to, the need to know, and you keep needing to know more and more and more. That's only going to continue to spiral, and it's going to cause the other person to push away because you're going to be suffocating them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I'd like to go back to the point of you talked about the retroactive jealousy sort seems to happen when you fall in love. So at what point is that? Is that, like the first few months after the honeymoon phase when you start exchanging maybe I love yous and you start to actually fall in love, or is it a little bit deeper? When do you normally see that happening?
It varies, I think, with the individual, of course, but I think if I had to say, I've never really thought about that before, but I think in terms of like when in the relationship it happens, I would guess that for most people it's kind of just after or in the midst really of the early honeymoon period. Shortly after you start getting more invested, shortly after you exchange those I love yous and stuff, which makes sense because if there's a moment for you to start freaking out and having that fear of loss, it's then because you realize like oh shit, like I'm actually really invested in this person. I really care. I don't want to lose this thing that I'm investing so much in. So I would estimate it's probably in the early sort of honeymoon period that it first comes up for most people. That was true for me, and now that I think about it, I think that's true for most people I talk to.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think this is a little interesting. I'm just thinking about this right now. Um, I feel like you wouldn't have jealousy with your best friend, right? You probably wouldn't have this type of jealousy with someone that you might be hooking up with or someone you might be, dating on and off for, a few months. But it seems to really happen when that relationship becomes very intimate and it seems to get more serious. Do you have any insight on, why that happens? Like it seems to happen with the people that you're the closest to.
Yeah, well, the I would say, and to any evolutionary biologists listening to this who disagree, please feel free to pass on your comments. I'd be curious to read them. But I think the evolutionary biologist take on this would probably be, in the early stages when you're starting to really invest in the person emotionally. On some level, for a man, you think about, well, okay, well, with this woman, could I raise children with this woman? Would this woman give me good offspring? Could she be trusted? If she gets pregnant, am I going to know it's my baby? That kind of thing. And for the woman, she's thinking, is he going to be a suitable on some level? This is the evolutionary biologist's argument. On some level, she's thinking, is he going to be able to stick around to help me, face the Herculean task of raising offspring? Perhaps I should dig into his past a little bit to see what kind of man he is, to see what kind of life he's led. Can I rely on him over the long term to raise babies? Now, this is a sort of subconscious. This is not, most of the time people are not conscious that these thoughts are going on in the back of their brain. But that argument makes a lot of sense to me. It's contentious to some extent. There are some people who disagree with it, but I think that it makes sense on some level that there be a part of us wondering about these things because we humans go back a long, long time. We have hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary history. Raising children is one of the most difficult things you can do for most of human history, and we need to be very careful with where we invest our resources, where we invest our hearts, really. So I think that might explain. That might answer your question.
Yeah, yeah, I think it does. So why do you think we, have a need to, or such a compelling need to always know about our partner's past? And why does it like have to be OCD? Why do we have to keep asking and thinking that the next answer and the knowing everything about our partner's past is somehow going to help us handle it better?
Well, I think the thing is, we often want to get a fuller picture of who we're dealing with here. Like, who are we actually investing in here? Who are we preparing to perhaps spend our lives with or raise children with, etc. So that makes sense to me. And a lot of people misread me or misjudge me. They think that I say, "Oh, well, the past doesn't matter at all," and you should accept your partner's past no matter what it is. Absolutely not. Like if you're a recovering addict and you're falling in love with another addict or a current heroin user or whatever, like okay, that's probably not a good idea.
Right.
Depending on what your morals are, depending on what your values are, sure, sometimes the past can be a deal breaker. I can respect that, even if I don't share your perspective on that. So I think a lot of it is about mitigating risk. We want to be careful about who we're investing in. And a lot of it, again, I think comes down to insecurity. A lot of guys, you probably won't be surprised to know, they'll get hung up on, okay, well, were you with anyone who is, bigger than me? That kind of thing. Am I the best you've ever had? That kind of thing. And they keep digging, they keep digging, they keep wanting these answers. And that puts their partner in a really uncomfortable, awkward position. And that really serves to fuel the imagination of the jealous lover. So there's really nobody wins in this situation. But on some level, yes, I can have empathy for, of course I can have empathy for retroactive jealousy sufferers in terms of if they're just wanting to know to get a fuller picture of who they're investing with. I understand that. But again, at a certain point, you have to let go a little bit. You have to be prepared to take the chance. And I think you also have to be prepared to let go, really. I think that's the best way to put it, to realize that there's some things that are out of your control and to realize that everyone is a big old, bag of problems. I'm a different set of problems than you would be to date. We all have our issues. And if you choose one person, you're choosing their issues to a certain extent. But if you choose, the person next to them, you're going to have different issues.
Right.
No one's perfect, I guess this is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think actually I'm going to loop it back to your expectations earlier because I think a lot of jealousy too stems from one person having certain expectations of another, and maybe that person not living up to those expectations, whether they're, um, maybe those expectations are a little too much. But I think that also can cause a lot of jealousy and can cause issues in relationships too.
Absolutely. And then again, that a lot of that I think comes back to the pop culture stuff in terms of, we're gathering expectations of what to expect from life and love and relationships from, I would argue, a lot of detrimental, harmful sources in pop culture.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it comes back to, our childhood and our parents. And in a way, you're screwed either way, because if you grew up in a house with a really healthy, loving relationship with, seemingly, perfect parents, or, who had this perfect marriage, in a lot of ways that messes you up, because that, you don't see the fights behind closed doors. You don't see the hidden betrayals, perhaps, or whatever. You don't see the messy bits. And so that sets you up with, you're looking for this ideal that is unrealistic for the rest of your life. And if you grow up as you did, in what some people would call a broken household with divorce or whatever, that also can cause a whole bunch of trust issues. So yeah, we're a complicated species, man.
Yeah, I completely agree with all that.
Yeah.
So whether you're a man or a woman, what are some ways to get out of your own head and how to deal with jealousy?
There's a lot of ways. I think some of it is simply comes down to, as we talked about earlier, perspective shifting. So if you believe something really deeply about relationships or about your partner, like I really need my partner to do X to make me happy. I would say that the best thing to do is to go deep into that belief and start poking it and start questioning it and asking if that's really true. And if you actually need those things, like choose your words carefully. And in terms of ways to get out of your head, I mean, this is such a cliche. It almost doesn't bear repeating. Meditation is huge. One thing I talk about a lot in my online course and my guidebook, and that is the benefits of even just taking 5 minutes out of your day to focus on your breath, and how incredibly powerful and liberating that can be. And I've gotten emails from people who, are truck drivers in the Midwest or whatever, like incredibly suspicious of any kind of Eastern wisdom or Buddhism or meditation or anything. And I've got them meditating. And, it's really had a beautiful impact on a lot of people. So if you're looking for just a really simple way to get out of your head, very practical way to get out of your head, I think investigating some kind of basic mindfulness practice is really powerful. And don't be put off by, a lot of people online say you have to do at least an hour or two a day. I think that is the wrong approach. And if you just even can spare 2 minutes to begin with, just try it just for 2 minutes, it can have a really big impact. The other tip I would give, in terms of just a very practical tip, is if you're out somewhere and you're having some kind of jealous episode, or you're having some kind of mini panic attack or something like that, bring your attention into the soles of your feet. So literally just try to become very conscious of how, the weight of your body feels in the soles of your feet. Really try to feel your feet on the ground. And this sounds really simplistic and perhaps kind of silly, but one thing it does literally is get you out of your head. You're focusing on your body. You're focusing on something you can, feel pretty intensely if you take a minute to be conscious of it. And even just that kind of gets you out of your head for a minute. So that's another tip that I would give that's very practical and very simple.
So those are great tips. And I guess what I'd like to know is, especially with retroactive jealousy, we talked about there being a combination with OCD. So I feel like that might be difficult. Someone who is jealous might be able to step away for a moment, maybe 5 minutes of meditation or just mindfulness, but then they go back to those thoughts. So how do they change those thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that can often take a lot of really deep work, and a lot of difficult work, I would say. But another quick tip you can do, that anyone can do, to sort of start getting out of that cycle and start training the brain to react differently to those thoughts. Because one thing I talk about a lot in my book and course is this idea that your thoughts are clouds. So people hear this, they don't really, it doesn't really resonate with them right away. The idea is basically, we think that our thoughts are real. We think that we have, say I have some thought about my ex-girlfriend's past. I might think that is necessarily bad or disgusting or unpleasant or painful or whatever. But these are all labels that I'm throwing at that thought, right? These are things this is a power that I'm giving to that thought. On its own, that thought doesn't have any power over me whatsoever. That's just a thought. It's just like a cloud passing overhead in the sky. You wouldn't get angry at a cloud. You wouldn't throw rocks at a cloud. You wouldn't, think that a cloud is painful or unfair or whatever. It's just a cloud passing overhead. So again, this comes back to meditation. Meditation can be great for helping us to realize that on a very, very deep level, that we are not our thoughts. But something that someone can do in the moment when a thought comes up that they feel isn't serving them, or a thought that is threatening to disrupt their day. This comes from a book called Brain Lock on OCD, which is a brilliant book. I would strongly recommend for any OCD sufferer. But anyway, one of the first techniques in that book is to basically just disidentify or de-identify, disidentify, I guess, from that thought. So instead of latching onto the thought, instead of trying to get to the bottom of it, and instead of letting it disrupt your day, you basically just say, it's not me, it's OCD. Or for retroactive jealousy sufferers, you can say, it's not me, it's RJ. And again, this is a very simple thing, but once you do that, you all of a sudden have great power. Because in a way, you're sort of walking away from that thought, even just for 1 minute. You're planting the idea in your head that you're more powerful than this thought, that this thought doesn't have any power over you, that you don't give it. So even just that simple act of saying, it's not me, it's RJ, or it's not me, it's OCD, can have real consequences and a real impact. After that, a good thing you can do is basically find something to occupy your mind. So I address this in particular to any OCD sufferers out there. It's often not enough to just say, it's not me, it's OCD, and try to continue on. What you want to do, if possible, is to find some activity or some task that requires a lot of concentration. So, perhaps it's something at work, or reading a good book, or watching a television show, or whatever. A follow-up question I often get when I offer this advice is, people will say, okay, well, I'll say it's not me, it's RJ, but then 2 minutes later, I've got the same thought. What should I do? My advice in that situation is repeat, rinse and repeat. Keep doing it, because our brains are plastic to a large extent. We actually have power to remold them. We can change the way our brain functions to a pretty impressive extent. So this is about repetition. It's about diligence, and it's about just keep hammering in. Because when you get stuck in the OCD thought cycle, the neural pathways in your brain become more strengthened over time. So the more you engage in the same destructive thought cycle, the more those neural strength pathways are strengthened. It's almost like a muscle, like the more stress you put on it, the more repetition that muscle goes through, the stronger it gets. So the trick is to try to break through, break out of that cycle any way you can. And the method of disidentifying from your thoughts, to say your thoughts are clouds, can be really helpful. And it's a really easy first step for anyone listening to this struggling with OCD.
Right. So you're sort of separating, your thoughts and the feelings from actually being things.
Yeah, you're basically you're not letting thoughts have power over you, and you're acknowledging in a very real way that you're stronger than those thoughts, and that those thoughts don't represent who you are, and you actually have power over them.
Right. And you're basically rewiring your brain with these patterns.
Exactly. It's all about habit building. It's so important when you're confronting anything to do with OCD.
Yeah, so it's kind of like brushing your teeth every day. You just got to, keep getting into that habit, creating that habit, repetition, rewiring your brain, and then slowly over time, you're more well equipped anyways, to handle your jealous thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good analogy, actually. Absolutely.
So what has helping others overcome jealousy taught you about yourself?
Wow. That's a good question. I think it's taught me that, at the risk of sounding self-serving or grandiose or something, I really, really, really love helping people. I was, by this point in my life, I was supposed to be a history professor. I was in graduate school when I wrote my book on overcoming retroactive jealousy, and I was planning on a different career path. I've been very, very, very interested in personal development and spirituality and Buddhism and meditation. I've been interested in all those things for a long time. But I didn't really think that my life was going to involve them in a very significant way in terms of professionally. So I think this process in helping people overcome jealousy has really helped me realize that, there's really no better feeling than getting these emails in my inbox from people saying, I've been struggling with this for 20 years, and, your course has helped me saved my marriage, and I was going to get a divorce, and now we are in Cancun, and things like that. It feels really, 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 really good. So I think, yeah, that's probably been the biggest lesson. It's just the incredible feeling of helping someone in need is second to none.
Yeah, I think there's a beautiful feeling of, servicing others, and the just the feeling that you get from that is so uplifting and so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, there's this quote that I love to. I say it, I think, on every podcast I've ever been on, but it's one of my favorites. It's this quote by the Russian concert pianist Andrei Gavrilov. He says, "The meaning of life is give love and seek nothing in return. Reciprocal love is your reward, and the meaning of life in its entirety." And I think about that quote a lot. It's kind of been my North Star over the past 5 years since I've been helping people overcome jealousy. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think that's a good quote too, especially to bring it back to what we were talking about earlier about when you're having these jealous thoughts that you're not able to really love that other person because your mind is so consumed with those thoughts that, you can't fully love that person.
Absolutely, and you can't really experience love when you're holding back. Again, it comes back to the fear and the sense of loss. So again, I think that a good question to ask ourselves in those moments is, okay, what's the alternative? Am I really going to keep trying to move forward with this person, with one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake for the rest of the relationship? Is that really the life, the relationship that I want? What is the alternative here? Really go deep into that question and poke around, because I think the alternative is not very appealing.
Yeah, I agree with you. So you asked me about, my current relationships and past relationships. Do you still deal with jealous thoughts yourself?
Of course, absolutely. I'm human. Those things still come up once in a while, sure, and it's not pleasant. But the difference is, I think I know the way through it now,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a really good feeling. And again, I think meditation was big for me in this regard, because I think before I got a little deeper into meditation and a little deeper into personal development, I felt like a victim a lot, of my thoughts, of circumstances.
Mm.
And I think that in particular, meditation has helped me out of that, because it's helped me realize that I have the power to choose my perspective, that thoughts don't necessarily have power over me. And that, no matter in any situation I find myself in, I have this amazing tool that can help me stay grounded and present and focused. So even just, meditation has been huge for me in that regard. But yeah, of course, I still get jealous sometimes, and I still deal with insecurity about different things. And, there's a lot about me in my life that I'm working to improve. There's a lot of things that I'd like to change. But I think the difference now compared to, say, 10 years ago is that I know I have the power to change those things. I know I have the power to move toward the life I want to live, to be the man I want to be. It just takes work, and it takes enormous sacrifice, but I'm prepared for those things. So yeah, I think it's about not being a victim, really, because I think before I would have a jealous thought, and I would kind of just let my day be ruined by it. But I see it a lot differently now.
So how would you rate, your overall life now and even your relationships now that you have a better sense of how to handle jealous thoughts? Do you find that your relationships and just the quality of your life is much better now that you're no longer, in that victim mode?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, if my life was an Uber driver, what rating would I give it?
And would you tip
That's
him?
good. Yeah, when I tip him, I would absolutely give a big tip. Yeah. I mean, it's been huge. I mean, this is going to sound self-serving perhaps, but one of the reasons I'm so interested in this topic, and that I really love doing this kind of work, is because I see the return on your investment is so huge in terms of investing in yourself enough to get to a point where to a certain extent, overcome jealousy as much as anyone can. It's huge. And I think that, again, I think before if you're letting jealousy run your life, if you're letting those thoughts hamper your day, if you're not really prepared to take that chance, it's like driving with one foot on the brake all the time, and it's really tiring. Like any mechanic will tell you that people who drive like that, it's really hard on the engine. The engines aren't, they're not built for that. It's the same for our lives. It's like you're trying to move forward, but you're always holding back a little bit. And you want to dive in, but you're, only kind of sticking your foot in the water. And you want to trust this person. You really like them, and they make you feel good. But, oh, wait a minute, they have the potential to hurt you. it's like, welcome to life, man. There's no 100% safe bet out there. There's no, it doesn't matter if it's a career you choose, if it's a woman or a man you choose, if it's a location you want to move to. There's no safe bet. There's no one answer that's the perfect answer for your life. And I think that the more you can just kind of let go, and the more you can realize that everything in life is a trade-off. Everything in life involves sacrifice. I think the more you can kind of let go and just be okay with taking the risk that is life, the better your life is going to be. So yeah, my life is a lot different now. I think I take myself a lot less seriously. I laugh a lot more. And I'm just more excited to get out of bed in the morning when you feel like, I have the potential to handle anything life throws at me. Because even, like I talk about the idea sometimes, what is the absolute worst case scenario for your current partner? Like if you're feeling jealous and you're upset about their past, or you're unsure about what they might do in the future, go deep into that idea. Like, okay, what's the worst case scenario? Really break it down. So from what I can gather, like the worst case scenario might be, okay, that person cheats on you with not one, not two, but say like 10 of your closest friends, and she empties your bank account. She burns down your house. She records videos on YouTube talking about what an asshole you are, whatever. Seriously, what is the absolute worst case scenario? And then think about how you'd respond to that, and if you could handle it. Really go meditate on that question. Like, okay, well, how would I respond to that? How could I handle it? And the answer that people come up with is that, okay, the worst case scenario would really, really suck. Even suck is an understatement. But I can handle that. I can handle the absolute worst that this person could throw at me. If all of my, darkest fears, if all the things that keep me up at night, if all of that's true, I can still handle that. And that's a really liberating realization, because once you go deep into that idea, once you really get a handle on that, and once you realize that, all of a sudden life seems a lot easier, because it's like, okay, I'm going to choose to love you. I'm going to choose to take that risk. I'm going to share my life with you. I'm going to try to love all your warts and all your dark places, because I know that no matter what you throw at me, I can take it. And I think that's a really sexy thing. I think that people find that level of confidence attractive. And B, it just lets you live your life, taking a massive exhale. It's like all of a sudden things seem a lot easier, and I think you're much more willing to step up to the plate once you realize that you have the power to handle anything this person throws at you. So yeah, my life is a lot better now. That was a very long-winded way of saying that.
Yeah, I think that was actually a great explanation, though, because I think, it just makes for, when you're able to handle it, jealous thoughts like that, I think it makes for just a much better relationship, because you can have, a deeper level of trust. You can laugh more. You can enjoy each other's company more. And even more sincerity in the relationship itself. It just allows for, a more natural relationship and natural connection.
Absolutely. And a lot more, I like the word realistic. It's a more realistic way of looking at things, as opposed to looking for perfection all the time, or looking for ultimate reassurance all the time. It's a more realistic, grounded way to look at things, I think.
Right. Actually, I'd like to pick your brain actually on reassurance. So how do you feel about, telling someone that they're beautiful, or that you love them, and actually, yeah, positive affirmations, from exchanging them, I should say. Do you think that plays a big role in sort of calming jealousy by, constantly telling someone, that they're beautiful, or that you love them, or, that they're enough, or things like that?
It's a great question. I think that it ultimately comes down to, like if I tell you you're a handsome dude or whatever, actually that's a bit odd. Let's choose a different
example.
Right. If I tell my girlfriend over and over and over, how beautiful I am and how much I'm drawn to her and how sexy I find her, etc., it really doesn't matter how much I say that if she doesn't believe it deep down herself. Okay, that's a cliche, that's a truism. But I think it's important to realize, because a lot of jealousy sufferers look to their partner to provide some kind of ultimate reassurance. They're looking for that all the time. But if they don't believe it deep down in themselves, their partner can tell them until they're blue in the face how amazing they are, how sexy they are, how much they're wanted, etc. But it doesn't really matter unless they believe it deep down. So again, this is tough work, but the jealousy sufferer has to put in that deep work on themselves has to go deep into their insecurities and confront them head on, because if they're looking for their partner to solve the jealousy problem, or if they're looking to their partner to solve their insecurity problem, they're going to be disappointed every single time, because that stuff, no one can fix that for you except you. That takes your own work. But in terms of just positive affirmations in relationships in general, I mean, I give all kinds of compliments when I'm in a relationship, because I find it very difficult to hold those things back. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think that my partner can sense that it's coming from a genuine place. It's not like I'm trying to, ease her insecurity. It's not like I'm trying to, manipulate her in some way or anything like that, like some guys do. It's coming from a genuine place of just taking delight in this gorgeous creature, sitting across from me or whatever. So I think a lot of it comes down to, the energy, like where is that affirmation coming from? Is that coming from a place of love, or is that coming from a place of manipulation or an attempt to ease the other person's insecurity? Because that can be a real turnoff, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's kind of goes to your intentions, because there are some relationships where it's used as a manipulation mechanism, and then there are other relationships where, it is very sincere and it comes straight from the heart. But I think there's a big difference, and most of the times you could probably tell that. But, there are some people that are probably pretty good manipulators and can get their way through that.
To say the least, yes. I'm going to take a moment to plug someone else's book here, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
For any man listening to this who wants to, connect with women better and get deeper into this place of love and sort of really taking delight in women, there's an amazing book called The Alabaster Girl by a guy called Zan Perian. I have no affiliation with him whatsoever, but this book had a huge impact on me in my interactions with women. So any man who wants to go deeper into, how do I compliment a woman? How do I take delight in the women around me? That book is really, really, really great.
I love it that you're promoting someone else's book.
It's great. It's a really great book.
So honestly, I've had a lot of fun with this whole conversation. I would love to know where people can connect with you if they want to learn more, they want to learn about your course, they want to read your book, they want to check out your website, social media accounts. Where can people find you?
So anyone dealing with jealousy, I would recommend going to retroactivejealousy.com. That's my website. You can find information about my book on there. You can also find my book on Amazon with a bunch of reviews and stuff. I've been getting into Instagram lately, so I'm on Instagram at ZF Stockill. You can watch me eat things around the world. And what else? Facebook's good, Zachary Stockill. But yeah, I would say any jealousy sufferer in particular, go to retroactivejealousy.com. That's probably the best way to connect with me.
Perfect. So I have one final question for you. It's usually a question that I ask most people. What is your definition of adversity, and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, when I got your email, I was intrigued by that question. I think maybe a good definition of adversity is the thing that stands between you and the thing you want. So I guess in terms of overcoming adversity, it's finding ways to go above, around, and through that thing that stands between you and what you want.
Perfect. I like that answer. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you for taking the time to really dig deep in yourself and understand that in your early 20s, you might have not had successful relationships going forward, and you took the time and the effort to actually put in the hard work and get to the other side. And then not only did you do that, you're also helping service other people and help them with their relationships and all the work that you're doing and changing people's lives and helping them live better relationships. So I just want to take a moment, to thank you for everything that you do.
Well, thank you very much, Gary. I really appreciate that. And congratulations to you for this podcast.
Hey guys, if you really enjoyed today's show with Zachary, then make sure you head over to the show notes at laughatadversity.com/9. Here you can find everything that we talked about, including the links to Zachary's social media pages, his book, and his website. Also, if you want to do your own part in giving back, then make sure you head over to iTunes or your podcast player. Please subscribe and leave a review. They're so important in getting the show found by others and helping change their lives.